When you think of, the ultimate symbol of culinary luxury, of refinement, and really of France, one thing probably comes to mind.
Foie gras.
Foie gras. That pale, rich, silky texture. It just feels like the definition of modern haute cuisine.
It absolutely is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the peak of French technique, but the story of how we got there is, well, it's one of the longest journeys in culinary history. Our sources today really take us on a deep dive, spanning more than 4,000 years.
Exactly. And that's our mission today. Most people hear foie gras and they think Paris, maybe Strasbourg. But we're going to unpack this culinary time capsule, and we have to go way, way back.
Far outside of Europe, actually. The shocking thing is that the roots of foie gras aren't French at all.
Yeah.
They start with a simple, brilliant observation in ancient Egypt, around 2500 BCE.
Okay, let's unpack that. So we're going back to the banks of the Nile, not for philosophy or pyramids, but for watching geese.
For watching geese get ready to fly, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating here is that the core technique came from observing and then, using natural biology. Well, Egyptian farmers noticed that wild geese would naturally engorge themselves. I mean, they'd overeat like crazy
Yeah.
right before their annual migration.
Yeah, we're fuel loading.
They were fuel loading,
Yeah.
storing massive amounts of energy as fat and storing it specifically in their livers.
That is such a simple, brilliant observation. But I mean, it's one thing to see a bird do that naturally. It's another to turn it into a consistent process 4,500 years ago. How did they manage that?
That's where the human element comes in. The intentional fattening process started by feeding the geese huge amounts of energy-dense food,
Like what?
grain and figs. And we know this for a fact because it's literally etched in stone.
You're kidding. We have actual physical documentation.
Yes, hieroglyphic carvings in Saqqara, in the Tomb of Tea, dating to around 2500 BCE, you can see these clear depictions of servants, well, of them force-feeding geese.
Wow.
So think about that. The foundational science behind this dish is millennia old. It's just rooted in recognizing a natural biological cycle.
Okay, so this practice obviously didn't stay in Egypt. It had to travel. And the sources point to the Roman Empire as the next stop.
Right. It spread across the Mediterranean,
Yeah.
and in Rome, it was highly prized. They called the goose liver ecker ficcetum.
Ecker ficcatum. And here's where it gets really interesting linguistically. The sources say that word ficcatum, it didn't just mean liver.
No, it came from the practice of flavoring the liver with figs, or ficus in Latin.
So ficcatum means like figged liver.
Essentially, yes. And that Roman word, ficcatum, is the direct preserved root of the modern French word foie.
No way. So the word itself is a little linguistic time capsule from Rome.
It is. The name literally survived the fall of the empire, even when the technique itself almost vanished.
Right. So after Rome falls, this really complex culinary skill, it just disappears from the mainstream.
Almost completely. The chaos after the empire's collapse meant that this kind of dedicated specific knowledge just wasn't maintained. But thankfully, the technique was preserved.
By who?
By Jewish communities, mainly in Central and Eastern Europe.
So they kept the flame alive. How did that happen?
It was sort of an accidental preservation, born from necessity. Pork and pork fat are forbidden under kosher law, so they needed a different, permissible cooking fat.
And the fattened goose provided that.
Exactly. It provided a rich supply of what's known as schmaltz.
So in the process of making this high-quality cooking fat, the schmaltz, they inadvertently kept the very specific knowledge of how to produce the fatty liver itself alive.
That's it, exactly. It's a remarkable cultural accident, a true culinary time capsule, kept safe by tradition till it could reemerge, which it did during the Renaissance, back in Western Europe.
And it lands, finally, in France, in Alsace in the southwest.
Right. And here's where it settles into its adopted home.
What was it about France that made it the perfect place for foie gras to finally become this icon?
Well, the terroir, for one. The local climate, the abundant cornfields. It all provided the perfect feed and environment for the technique to really flourish and become part of the local gastronomy.
And by the 18th century, it's not just a local thing anymore. It's on its way to becoming a national emblem. We're talking about Strasbourg, Toulouse, Périgord.
Right. And the turning point, the moment it goes from a regional specialty to true haute cuisine, that's often credited to one man. A chef named Jean-Joseph Claus.
Okay.
He was in Strasbourg. And in 1779, the story goes, he presents his pâté de foie gras to the local governor.
And I'm guessing that was a pretty big hit.
It was a massive hit. It gained immediate immense fame at the royal court of Versailles. And suddenly this wasn't just dinner, it was a symbol of luxury, of French artistry at its peak. Claus even patented his method for preserving it.
And that's how the modern icon was born.
That's it.
Okay, so that's the incredible history. But now let's decode the delicacy itself. Foie gras literally means fat liver. When you're served the real deal, what are the specific things you're looking for? The markers of perfection.
You are looking for very specific sensory cues. First, the texture. It has to be smooth, silky. It should really melt in your mouth, almost like a savory butter that holds its shape.
And the flavor.
It's complex, buttery, for sure, a little nutty, slightly sweet, and it has to have that umami depth. Also the color, a pale golden beige. If it's not that, the quality might be off.
We should probably also distinguish between the different forms because they're not all the same.
Not at all. The purest form is foie gras entier. That's the whole intact liver, the highest quality. Then you have bloc de foie gras, which is reconstituted from smaller pieces. Still delicious, but a different product.
Right. So that brings us to the technique. Because it's so delicate and has such a high fat content, it's famously difficult to cook. What are the secrets to getting it right?
The single biggest factor is temperature. You have to get the temperature control just right.
Why is that so critical?
Because the liver is almost pure fat. If you heat it too aggressively, all that fat just renders out too fast, and the whole structure collapses. You're left with a puddle of oil.
You want it to melt in your mouth, not in the pan.
Precisely. The sources say it has to be cooked gently. We're talking between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius. That's about 122 to 140 Fahrenheit. That slow heat lets the fat melt evenly without everything falling apart.
And what about that famous pan-seared version, the poulet? The timing on that has to be instant.
Oh, it requires extreme precision. First, you have to score the surface lightly. That helps the fat render and stops it from bursting. Then, a smoking hot pan, but for only about 30 to 40 seconds per side.
That's it.
That's it. You want the caramelized crust on the outside, but the inside should still be creamy and warm.
That is an incredibly fine line to walk.
It is. And even before you cook, there's the prep. You have to devein it.
Yeah.
Carefully remove any visible veins. If you skip that step, the final texture will be grainy, unpleasant.
And the classic pairings. They're all
Yeah.
about balancing that richness, right?
Right.
Sweet and acidic things.
Correct.
Yeah.
You always see it with sweet wines like a Sauternes, or with fig jam, apple compote, a balsamic reduction, something to cut through that fat and cleanse the palate. It's a crucial counterpoint.
So let's bring it back to the big picture. It's cultural weight today. Foie gras is so much more than a dish. In France, it's really part of the national identity.
It is. I mean, if we connect all this history, it's not just about food. It's about maintaining tradition, technique, and cultural identity through what you eat. Foie gras really symbolizes French luxury, that whole philosophy of pleasure through technique.
And that status is actually protected by law, which is staggering to me.
It is. In 2006, it was officially declared part of France's protected gastronomic heritage, the Patrimoine culturel et gastronomique protégé de la France.
That's a huge statement. It basically says the skill to make this is a national treasure.
A national treasure.
Yeah.
And while it's made all over, you still have that holy trinity of regions, Périgord, Alsace, and Gers, where the local terroir really defines the final flavor.
And it remains the centerpiece of celebration. Christmas, weddings, big banquets.
It carries the weight of all that history in every single slice.
What an incredible journey. From a simple observation of birds in ancient Egypt, preserved through the fall of an empire by Jewish tradition, and then perfected at the court of Versailles, it connects all these disparate historical threads in one dish.
It is. You know, the master chef Auguste Escoffier once said something like, "Foie gras is the truest expression of elegance in cuisine, where science meets art and indulgence meets history." And that really captures it. Centuries of refinement in a single bite.
So what does this all mean for you? Well, consider this. We've tracked a luxury food from 2500 BCE to today. It survived empire collapses and cultural shifts, all because of a simple, repeated process. So how many other luxury foods that we enjoy might have similarly ancient, complex origins rooted in some forgotten observation of nature? What subtle culinary traditions might we be accidentally preserving in our own kitchens just by cooking the way our grandparents did? That's something to chew on the next time you look at your own dinner plate.